Welcome to the Superfast Matt 100,000 Subscriber Spectacular with special guest Matt, also starring nobody, it's just Matt.
If you've been following my channel, you might have noticed that I tipped over 100,000 subscribers this past Friday. What you probably didn't notice is that at literally that exact moment, I was in my Honda S600, shredding the rear tires, pedal to the floor, banging off the rev limiter at 12,000 RPMs. That video will be up in a few weeks on another channel, I'll let you know when. How do I celebrate this milestone of minor YouTube fame, other than changing my LinkedIn to say YouTuber? I decided that I'm going to celebrate it by telling you about all the times that I was wrong. Now, I know what you're thinking. Matt, I don't have time for a 6-hour video, but it's actually not that bad. I have highlighted mistakes that I've made along the way in several previous videos. Oh look, it's right where the ring gear is. Good job, idiot. Flip the main switch and nothing happened. You might have a similar issue if you too forget to put in the fuses. You need fuses. Aw, did you forget to put the shift lever on? You dumbass. I made it all the way without forgetting I put it on backward. I like doing this because it makes it less likely that other people will also make that same mistake. But sometimes I find a mistake after the video is up, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, without further ado, corrections. In a couple of my early videos on the Jaguar, I complained that I couldn't get any of my wrenches to fit the nuts and bolts on the car. Also, the fasteners, not well made. A lot of them don't fit a standard wrench. You have to use an adjustable wrench. Presumably in the 50s, all the wrenches were a bit sloppy to make up for the fact that all the bolts were a bit sloppy. As many of you pointed out, the bolt heads were the correct size, I just wasn't using the correct wrench. The Jag was made with Whitworth fasteners. Whitworth is a standard from many years ago that is somewhat similar to current inch fasteners, but a little bit different. Like this is a common inch bolt. It is a 1/4 inch in diameter, it has 28 threads per inch, and the head is 7/16 of an inch. This is a Whitworth bolt, also a 1/4 inch diameter, but only 26 threads per inch, and its head is not any common fraction, it's just 445 thousandths of an inch. That doesn't equal anything in imperial or metric, so you need the special Whitworth wrenches, spanners. I'm actually super surprised that I didn't know this, especially given how much of my life revolves around fasteners. I just never owned anything old and British before the Jag. If I had known this, I would have bought a set of Whitworth spanners to help take the car apart. Instead, I just kind of hammered on whatever the closest tool was that I had. But even if I had bought the Whitworth tools, I probably would have still gotten rid of all the old nuts and bolts. It's hard enough to find weird-shaped metric fasteners in US hardware stores. I'm not going to further complicate this thing by mixing metric, imperial, and a long obsolete British standard. In my wiring video, I mentioned that if you're not sure what size fuse you need, that you should probably err on the side of too much fuse. This was poorly worded at best. You should always use the correct size fuse, but here's kind of what I was trying to say. Let's say you're rewiring your car and you're not sure what size fuse to use for the headlights. Maybe the original manual says 15 amps, but the replacement bulbs say to use a 10 amp fuse. In this situation, I would probably just use a 15 amp fuse, but here's the important part. You can use a 10 amp fuse, but if you're rewiring your car, you don't want to wire it for 10 amps and then later switch to a 15 amp fuse when you keep blowing your 10 amp. The wiring needs to be rated for at least as much current as whatever fuse you're going to put in. Here's maybe what I should have said. If you're not sure what size fuse to use, look around some more, and if you're still not sure, err on the side of too much current carrying capacity in your wiring. Then put the smaller fuse in. If you keep blowing the smaller fuse, then you can either replace the electrical part, or if you're feeling lucky, put in a slightly bigger fuse that corresponds to the current carrying capacity of the wires you installed. But honestly, you shouldn't really be unsure about the required fuse size. You should always be able to figure that out. In my brake line video, I showed a common layout with one of the master cylinder outlets going to the front and the other going to the rear. It's also common to see cross layouts where you have one outlet going to the left front and the right rear, and the other outlet going to the right front and the left rear. I was under the impression that this was only common on ABS systems, but apparently it's very common on European vehicles, even the pre-ABS ones. This is a safer situation if one of your circuits stops working. If you have the front-rear layout and your front stops working, you could easily lock up your rear tires and spin out. I still prefer the front-rear split because you can more easily adjust the bias. But if you're redoing the lines on a car that came with a different layout, it might be best to stick with the original layout. I also mentioned that most of the time the front master cylinder outlet goes to the front and the rear to the rear. This is usually the case, but not always, and the master cylinder I showed to demonstrate this is probably the opposite. Since the rear reservoir is larger, it probably goes to the front brakes. In my supercharging video, I incorrectly called the output of the supercharger 250 watts. It is, of course, 250 kilowatts. I actually said this twice. And then they begin their intimate 250 watt tango. I just can't shove 250 watts of high voltage into it. What's 3 orders of magnitude anyway? Also, basically immediately after I uploaded this video, Elon tweeted that Tesla was going to open up their superchargers to other vehicle manufacturers. I don't know if this changes anything for me. They're probably still not going to allow battery-swapped cars to supercharge. But in any case, when Elon tweets that something will happen next year, what he means is that something kind of similar might happen in 3 years, so I'm not holding my breath. I made a couple of small errors in my Tesla door handle video, one of which I don't think anybody mentioned. The first incorrect thing I did was calling sent digital, which is not technically true. It does switch between on and off, but it's not communicating the ons and the offs. It's communicating with the time between the ons and the offs. I said that it measures the time between the spike from 0 to 5 volts and the next spike from 0 to 5 volts. It actually measures the falling edge, the drop from 5 to 0. It doesn't really matter in explaining the concept, but it was technically inaccurate. Also, in that video, I mentioned that I couldn't get Arduino code to consistently read the sent signal coming from the door handle because the Arduino wasn't fast enough. Several people commented that Arduino should be plenty fast for that, so maybe I should have said that I can't read the sent signal because I'm not that good at Arduino. But if you know how I can time the microseconds between the falling edges of a 5 to 0 volt signal on an Arduino, drop me some code in the comments. There were a few other things, like the stuff between the fender and the body on old cars is actually called fender welting. I said that boogering up the wedge is a circle track phrase that means adjusting the corner weights, but it actually means setting the wrong corner weights. I've also made several grammatical errors that some of you have pointed out, and also a few fashion choices that could be called incorrect, but if these are things that bother you, you might be subscribed to the wrong channel. For the rest of you, I do sincerely appreciate your support, your subscribing, your comments to the algorithm gods. It is pretty awesome that I get to do this. You keep watching, I'll keep making videos. We'll see how far we can take this.